Hello and welcome to another episode of the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Um, and today, what we're going to be looking at, the whole notion of positive psychology has always intrigued me. And I was speaking with our guest just before we started recording here, a mentor of his and actually a friend of his, is a fellow by the name of Martin Seligman, who is the father of positive psychology. And Aaron Marcum is got a book out that I want to talk about, but more than talking about the book, I want to talk about his journey
Yeah.
and how he's integrated positive psychology into what he's doing today, and how it actually, I think, legitimately can be said to have turned his life around in some
Yeah.
very interesting ways. And not to say he wasn't successful before the before the catalyst, but the experience of fulfillment and success kind of meshed together, following a bit of an epiphany that he had. So, Aaron Markham, welcome to the show.
So good to be here, Blaine. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about, the topic of positive psychology. It did transform. It was part of my transformation for sure. So great to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Now, yeah, your book, EntreThrive, EntreThrive. It's an interesting
Yep.
coinage of word here. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, EntreThrive.
Entrepreneurial
Yeah,
thriving. I guess it's short for
yeah,
that.
that's
So
kind of a mashup. The Entrepreneur's 8 Laws to Accelerate Financial Freedom While Creating the Good Life. Financial freedom, good life, and acceleration. I mean, there's a couple of different things in there that we can play with. But just in terms of background, I mean, you're a serial entrepreneur. You really are focused in the home care space. And you had a lot of success early on,
mhm.
where you're looking. And my meme for this is, looked up one day and my wallet was fuller than my life. It was.
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
My wallet was fuller
Yeah.
than my life, and that realization oftentimes is kind of like a 2x4 for folks. It's kind of like, what am I
Yeah.
missing? Is that all there
Yeah.
is?
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about, if it's appropriate and if it's applicable, how that kind of came into
Yeah.
play for you? Because I got a hunch it is,
Yeah.
just based on
Yeah.
conversations we've
I
had.
100%. It was my journey. So if you just rewind to about 2015, I had founded a company that truly had transformed the home care industry. It was a data analytics company. It's a very well-known, reputable company in the home care space that works with about 4,000 home care providers. So a lot of success. Financial success started really growing, but I was not happy. 2015, if you look at my pictures in 2015, and even even I was bigger back then as well, but I just wasn't happy. In fact,
Yeah.
I pulled up that year and I was trying to find pictures where I looked like I was happy, and it's really interesting, that I wasn't happy. My pictures showed it. But but when we talk about acceleration, I realized, and my wife had several conversations with her. She's like, "You've got to make some changes. You're working too hard." I was in the business so much, and I did feel called. Like sometimes we can feel called. I talk about this in my book. I think calling is great. Like if you feel called to do something, you're going to stick with it. Your resilience goes up. There's a lot of research in positive psychology around grit and what makes someone really stick with something. But a calling can also make you obsessively passionate. And I was obsessive with my work.
Mhm.
And I thought I was living what was called the lie of the either or. I thought I either had to thrive personally or professionally, and I couldn't have both. But like most entrepreneurs, we pick the professional side, neglect the personal side, and figure that once our business is
Yeah.
successful, then our personal side will just catch up with that. And I figure after doing that for a few years in 2015, I realized that wasn't going to happen unless I really made it the priority. And so in 2016 was my acceleration year. I got into cycling. I finished a 200-mile bike race at the end by September of that year. If you look at my pictures in 2016, starkly different. In fact, I posted something, this the irony of this, posted something today on LinkedIn, had my team post it, but of pictures of me in 2015, then in 2016, and then now, which I continue to evolve. I'm in the best shape I've ever been. And it's because of this like all in kind of approach, is letting the past go and moving forward into a bigger, brighter future, and doing things that just make me uncomfortable. Just like going and getting my master's degree at age 50, at a school I never thought I would get into, UPenn. So
You've
it's all
been,
these
yeah.
kinds of things that make you uncomfortable, right? And yeah, and that's where Marty, is he still runs that program there, or at least he's involved. He doesn't run it, but he's involved. But that's kind of my journey. And then after 2016, if you look at and this is a really important point, in 2016, when I focused on my physical and spiritual, mental, it's not just about physical for me. Back then I had a lot of head trash, and I focused on my thinking. And as I did so, it was hockey stick growth in the company. And my team will tell you, when Aaron really started going internally and really fixing himself, the whole team benefited from that. And we just took off as a company, and its valuations just skyrocketed. And it was a fun journey. By 2018, I stepped down as CEO 2 years later. And
Interesting.
took a 7-week sabbatical. I mean, the journey, you once you start going all in on some things like this, you can accelerate into what I call the good life, or I didn't coin that. That's an Aristotle term, but the good life is the complete life. It's a journey. It's not a destination, but deciding what that looks like for you and going all in for it. I had decided back in 2016 what I really wanted, and did everything I could to make it happen. So.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of things that I want to spend a little time, I think, unbundling. The idea of, I was successful. I looked around and it didn't feel successful. So, the trap of being comfortable works for a while, until I start the nature of soul. In my experience, the nature of soul is it's that that spark that wants to express itself in ever greater ways. And if I find myself in a rut, kind of constrained, kind of comfortable, the expression of the soul starts to atrophy.
Yeah.
And as far as I can tell, the only real way out of that is to find a way to get uncomfortable again. And for adults, oftentimes that involves, in various ways, looking for, how do I start over? How do I start over? And it doesn't mean I'm throwing the baby out with the bath.
Right.
But
right. How do I
when
I call
you
it the
started
reset.
over,
Like, I need to reset things.
okay.
I need to, reset is I don't know. Either term works, frankly, because that's what you're doing. You're starting. You have to take a step back and say, okay, what do I need to let go of so that I can move forward? That's no longer serving who I really want to be. And so and in positive psychology, I do believe it starts with a term that Al Bender, a great positive psychologist, uses, kind of coined this term years ago: self-efficacy, the belief in ourselves, a belief that we can figure things out. And when you have that kind of belief, resetting is not so impossible. Like, you feel like, okay, I can do this. It's like that 200-mile bike race. I'd never been in cycling before. Bought my bike the very day I registered for this race, 5 months later. And when you have that belief, people thought I was nuts, especially those who've been cycling for a while and had never done the race before. But the human soul, like, we're so capable of things that we can't even imagine. That if we really believe that we can figure it out, that we can at least find the resources that can help us figure it out. I've never done a whole lot of great things on my own. It's always been finding people and figuring it out with people by my side. I call them my drafting partners. That's a cycling term, but people I can just kind
The
of get
cycling, yeah.
behind them and
Yeah.
draft off them. In the world of cycling, that saves you about 33% of your energy. And so if you can find
That's
mentors and guides and people, and I'm really big on this. I'm like, I'd never want to work, because I've gone the other route where I bought hook, line, and sinker into like a program that people were selling who really hadn't ever been there. And so I only
yeah.
want to use guides that either live on the path or have been on the path. And they're able to really walk
Yeah.
you through. So anyway, there's so many things in biking you can draw analogies for in business, but yeah.
Well, that notion of a drafting partner, if you will,
Yeah.
in my work with entrepreneurs and in my work with businesses that are looking to move to the next level, they oftentimes will get hung up on the question of how. And one of the things that I've learned to do, and this was out of my own experience, just as you're
Yeah.
describing it, I had to stop. I had to stop focusing on the how, because the how is always past oriented. The only reference I've got is what I've done before, or what I know that others have done before, which may or may not serve me. But the question of who is far more generative, because who points me in a direction of somebody that's already doing it or is already
Yeah.
walking it. And if I
Yeah.
can draft behind them,
Yeah.
all of a sudden the how starts to handle itself.
Yeah. It's the so Dan
I
Sullivan,
find
the
the path.
strategic coach, is my coach. So the who, not how concept,
That's no Dan. Yeah, yeah, Dan.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, he's a
yeah,
good
yeah.
guy.
So Dan is my coach. I see him every quarter. Yeah, I actually got Dan and Marty in the same virtual room, the three of us. It was pretty
Oh,
amazing to
wow.
see those two kind of like, and Marty quite liked the Gap and the Gain book that Dan and Ben Hardy wrote, and the concept of the gap and
Yeah,
the gain.
Ben
It's a
Hardy.
real
Yeah.
positive psychology concept in that sense. But who, not how, I mean, Blaine, that's one of the, if entrepreneurs could figure that out, I do talk about it in the book, because that could make all the difference from living a life of burnout and stress to living the good life, when you have the right people, the who are better than you and smarter than you, who could figure out how to make things happen. You just give them the vision. You say, okay, it's the John Maxwell's 10-80-10 rule, like 10% vision,
Yeah.
80% the how, then 10% you come back and make sure all the tweaks, edits or whatever it is you've delegated to them. And that to me creates so much space for an entrepreneur to create, which is the science shows that as entrepreneurs, creativity is so central to what we should. When you say soul of business, that's one of the words that come to my mind. Is creativity. That's, to me, that's a
Yeah.
soul of the entrepreneur. Is that when we're not
It,
creating, we're burning out quickly. We don't create, if we don't have that
yeah.
space to create. We're
There's
creators.
no new juice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I forget who it was that said this. It may have been Socrates. I'm not sure, but I know Carl Jung, the philosopher, certainly elucidated on it. But the imagination lives at the threshold of the spirit, of the soul. And yeah, when I
Mm-hmm.
can begin to find quiet time to actually imagine, and I don't mean imagine just daydreaming, I mean imagining, just truly using my
Yeah.
imagination for what it's designed for. It quickens and it accesses the spirit. And all of a
Oh,
sudden
yeah.
stuff starts to emerge that it's kind of like, wow. And I feel
Yeah.
emboldened, I feel enlivened, I feel
Yeah.
inspired. Inspiration
Yeah.
comes from the soul.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's that flow
for me,
state
that's
that
one of
Mihai sent me. Yeah.
the flow states. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You start tapping into that. We're going to take a real quick break here. When we come back,
Yeah.
in your book, you have itemized, and I don't necessarily want to go through all of these, but
Sure.
you've got 8 laws and habits and practices that can basically be leveraged to address burnout and, flip side of that, increase happiness and fulfillment. So Folks, we're listening to Aaron Marcum. Stay tuned. The answer to how is going to be on the other side of this little message. Okay?
Yeah.
The nature of life is evidenced in nature. Nature grows, and all of nature honors the desire to be more, to have more, and to do more. Life thrives when it's allowed to grow. And ideally, thriving is what we also, all of us, want to be able to do. Unfortunately, at some stage in life, most people find themselves settling into what I can only call a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out. You want to quickly get out of any rut that you find yourself in. When you stop growing, that's when the coffin starts to appear. The simple truth is this, and this is true for everything in nature. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Every one of us dies. So the question we need to come to grips with is not, are we going to die? The question nature asks us to answer is, are we truly living? That's what motivation is about. It's the desire to move. It's the desire to grow and to excel. Have I lived? How have I lived? I'd love for you to take advantage of my Leadership Mindset Masterclass. It's all about providing you with the tools to ensure thriving for yourself and for those around you. Register today to receive the free introduction video and find out more about this acclaimed program. You'll also receive a copy of my international #1 bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. I'm Blaine Bartlett, and I look forward to helping you thrive.
Welcome back. Before we took that little break, Aaron and I were talking a little bit about something that he has in his book, that EntreThrive, that I want to kind of begin to pull apart a little bit here. 8 laws and habits and practices that can conquer entrepreneurial burnout and increase happiness. And I'm reading that directly from this little cheat sheet I've got in front of me here for those of you that are watching the video on this. Just real quick, what are the 8 these 8 laws? Just real quick, and then we can kind of dive into a couple of them here.
Yeah. So really, I'll just rattle them off. As far as not the entire phrases or whatever, but the people will get the gist of them. So the first law, which I call the cornerstone law, is the law of entrepreneurial clarity, or entreclarity. I use that word entre, but it's entrepreneurial clarity. Second one's create, no surprise. So entre-create, the creativity of an entrepreneur. The third law is grit, so entre-grit. And that's, I go through the 5 levels of grit: curiosity, interest, practice, passion, and calling. And the deeper you get, the more staying power you have in a business, of course, right? The fourth one is connections, which is the number one thing that influences our well-being. And what that book last year, the longest Harvard study, the adult study, talks about this, but relationships tie into our well-being more than anything else. So I talk about the entrepreneur's relationships and these things called high quality connections and some other it's one of my favorite chapters. And then the fifth law is entre-faith, or entrepreneurial faith. Has 3 levels to it. Faith in ourselves, that's that self-efficacy. Faith in others, and giving others our trust early on in a relationship is really important. And then faith in a higher power, faith in God, and the impact that has on well-being. There's science that backs that up. And then the 6th law is entre habits, or entrepreneurial habits. I talk about the character strength habits like love, leadership, spirituality, habits we don't think about every day, that if they could be running in the background in what Wendy Wood calls the unconscious choices or habits, then if I could have love running in the background in most of my day, and that habit is there, and or self-regulation is another character strength, your ability to excel as an entrepreneur just goes up. The 7th law is entrepreneurial vigor. And that's all about aligning mind and body and getting your mind in control of your body. And I talk about the Mustang mind. and how to tame the Mustang mind. It's a real powerful concept that I share in that chapter. And the last law, which I call the keystone law, which is entrepreneurial agency or entre-agency. So one that Marty's really passionate about and has done some more recent work on. And he talks about the 3 pillars of agency. And you'll love this, Blaine, is that the first pillar is self-efficacy, going back to faith. That comes up again, believing in ourselves. So when we don't have that, our agency is taken away. Second pillar is optimism. So optimists see things as temporary. Pessimists see things as permanent. So as an entrepreneur, you can be a realist and yet see things as temporary. Optimism gets a bad rap sometimes. We think that we have to be a realist or an optimist. We can actually do both in the way that Marty kind of lays it out. And then the third pillar that Marty talks about is imagination. When we don't have our imagination, goes back to the second law, the creativity, then our agency is robbed there. And he has some great examples of that in society and when agency left. But those are the 8 laws. Agency also is about owning our crap, and not blaming others for our problems as entrepreneurs and things that come up. And I have several examples. And the whole book weaves in personal stories, not just my own, but members of my team and with other companies and people they would know. I mean, and using the science to back it up. It really is a great read that way.
Yeah. The idea of connection, I want to kind of focus in on that one for a moment here. I was in a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about the Buddhistic, the whole Buddhist philosophy of suffering. Not the philosophy of suffering, but kind of how suffering is held within that whole philosophical school. And most people assume that suffering is a consequence of attachment. And that's oftentimes how, when you read the Vedas and whatnot, that's the messaging that you kind of get from that. When I was, I spent time in a Zen monastery in Japan, and a bunch of years ago, doing silent meditations and this, so I mentioned that's as an indication that I'm not familiar with some of the things that kind of go in that whole epistemology. But I started thinking about, is it really attachment that causes suffering, or is it the experience of separation that causes suffering? Because if I'm experiencing being separate from a unified whole, which can be represented by God or spirit or soul or nature or whatever it is, I will feel isolated, and in that isolation, I begin to feel suffering. So when I'm looking at connection as one of the pillars that you're speaking to here, one of the laws that you're speaking to here, just in my listening, I was going, if I'm living a fulfilled life, and if connection is a pillar, if it's a kind of a cornerstone, keystone law, that would make sense to me, because I begin to collapse the experience of separation and actually begin to appreciate that I am part of something greater, and that I can actually, and this kind of goes back to the question of who, not how.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lot to unpack there. And I love the way you're defining attachment versus separation, because that does resonate with me, that separation is probably more related to the struggle, and to that, especially with, and not just with like God or soul or whatever, but with our closest connections, right? Is that we, our well-being is often tied to our deepest relationships. Not often, they are 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And that when those deep relationships are suffering, or we're in separation of some sort, and that doesn't even have to be physical, right? If we allow our businesses to get in the way of those relationships, like I did for years, I would come home, eat dinner at 6 with my kids. At the time we had 4 kids. I would go back. I had a home care agency at the time. I would go back in the office till 1 or 2 in the morning. And this was repeated for months. I was doing this, completely exhausted, not present. Within that entrepreneurial connections pillar, talk about 3 areas that I think are really key to make sure our deepest relations get the best of us. And by doing that, we also get the best of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just our deepest relationships are typically, reciprocational. They reciprocate. They'll give back when we can give. And so the first one, we hear this, but we probably don't hear it when it comes to our relationships very much. And it's congruency, right? Is that when we are congruent with who we are in private as we are in public, and we are who we say we are, and we show up in our relationships that way, it fosters those deeper relationships with the ones that really matter.
Yeah.
And that's something I've been working on for years, because I'll be honest, it hasn't always been a strength of mine to be the same person I'm representing in business as I'm also representing at home. My kids were seeing a frustrated father, and my team were seeing this rah, good job. I was encouraging my team, go after it, and considered probably even back then as a good leader, but I wasn't a good leader in my family like I should have been. And so that's incongruent, and that
Mm-hmm.
affects your deepest relationships. So that's one that I think, being self-aware of where you are with that. We actually we have in the book, and I'm trying to remember the exact URL. I can send it to you and put it in the show notes. But there is a tool that listeners could download to test their congruency. It's a great
Oh,
little
okay.
tool.
Yeah. I'll
Yeah.
put that
So
in
I'll
the
make
show
a
notes.
note of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll
Have
put that in
have
there.
someone from your team send that to me. Put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
I got a question for you here that just kind of popped in as you were talking here, and it has to do with what you were talking about the shift in yourself and what happened in your company when you began to. And my word for this is going to be very specific here. When you started being generous with yourself,
Yeah.
in terms of the care and feeding of Aaron Marcum.
Yeah.
My wife Cynthia Kersey is beginning to play with this notion a little bit. She runs a foundation called the Unstoppable Foundation. I'm on the board, and it's been around for 15 years. We've got about 500,000 people on a daily basis in Africa that are impacted by the work that is being
That's
done by the
amazing.
foundation.
Yeah.
But she's working with this notion of the generosity effect. What she's calling the generosity effect, which is different than giving, which is different than charity. It's about, it's predicated on the assumption that it's an abundant universe and I'm connected to everything. That notion of connection.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of, I'm testing the waters here a little bit. But as you started being generous with yourself, as an ancillary effect of that generosity, and I'm very precise with this word here, the generosity. Now, how did it begin? If it did, how did it begin to manifest itself in your staff, your team, your organization being more generous in what it was doing?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And the first thing that I think of when it comes to how it positively impacted my team when I started being more generous with myself and putting some more, building myself up, even my confidence, was letting go of things that, going back to the who, is that when you let go and you give trust to people that normally you would say, I'm going to do that, I'm going to, and you want that more of that control in a sense, or of the outcomes. And you're not as focused much on the how, but you're more focused on the how yourself than the actual who.
Yeah.
But when I started letting go, because I had to do that 200 miles, I had to put training in 2 or 3 hours, 4 or 5 days a week. And that was time I couldn't be in the office. So I had to let go. And so for me, being generous is also being generous with your team to give them things and empower them with opportunity that you normally have done in the past, but they've been wanting to probably take over for a while. It's probably something that I don't believe in delegating anything that someone, especially something that's recurring, that they're not going to love or be passionate about themselves. But when you really go about it in a strategic way and say, you know what, I've got to let go of these things, and you give those to your team and you encourage and empower. So my generosity for myself also allowed me to let go of things I shouldn't have been doing anyway. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And then my family, I was just home more. You know, when I was generous to myself, I wasn't in the office as much. My wife got into cycling, and so she is really good at cycling. I tell her to wait for me at the top of the hills now. And so I never thought that would happen, but she's really passed me. She's quite good. And so doing activities that we both enjoy, I think, and that started with me being generous with myself. I love the way you phrase that, honestly, Blaine, because that's really what it was. Is giving back to myself allowed me to open up my heart and my mind to others that were the closest to me, which also included team members of mine.
Yeah.
So
that's lovely.
Very well.
I love it.
Yeah.
Aaron, thanks. Folks, you know, I hate to bring this to a close. I really do. I could continue talking with you for a long time.
I appreciate it.
I love this area
fun.
of discourse. It has. And yeah, maybe we'll get together again here in another 3 or 4 months just to see how things are working.
I love it.
Okay. Folks, been talking to Aaron Marcum. Get a copy of his book, EntreThrive, EntreThrive, available in all of the suspect places that you'll usually find books.
Yeah.
Beyond that, where can people find out more about what you're up to and if they had a question, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so a lot of things in the book are found at entrethrive.com. So same name, for our website. There's tools, there's free downloads that they can get access to, that congruence. They really just need to go to that entrethrive.com and click on resources, and they can actually access the tools that way. I also, for home care entrepreneurs, we have a Breakaway Accelerator program at breakawayaccelerator.com. That they can check that out as well. But any of your listeners, it's going to be entrethrive.com is where they're going to find a lot of the good information relative to the good life and accelerating financial freedom. Some good resources there. So
great.
Yeah,
Aaron, thank you so much.
I appreciate
folks, you've been listening. My pleasure. Anytime and every time. Any way I can support what you're doing, I'm all over it. Truly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. This is Blaine Bartlett, your fearless navigator here. As always, my admonition at the end of the show is, in your life, find a way to be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. I think you'll find life works a whole lot better when you're giving things away. First of all, it just signifies that you live in an abundant world. And that's what you want to be able to do. Yeah, just recognize that it's abundance everywhere. Yeah, we are not separate. We are connected to everything. Take care, and I'll see you on the next episode.